then we want to discuss with them until the arrival of the president. It's about 45 minutes in something that got the title of the Eisenkot Doctrine. We spoke about it a little bit yesterday, last night in the opening, but we're going to be a bit more thorough. Who is with us? The General Nitzan Alon. He was head of operations, commander of the Central Command, many posts in the army. At the moment, he is in his retirement vacation. Next to him, Brigadier General Yoram was the commander of intelligence and many interesting positions in his military career. And last but not least, Amir Eshel. We all know him. He was the commander of the Air Force, head of the planning division, and a lot of other positions in the army. And I just want to clarify something. It's not quite clear. We talk about the Eisenkot Doctrine with the years that he was chief of staff, maybe even beforehand, maybe altogether before when he was commander of the North, that the one who compares between the Eisenkot Doctrine and the war between the wars. If I remember, the war between the wars was always there. What's new, Nitzan? First of all, I think that the Eisenkot Doctrine, to a great extent, is equivalent to the IDF strategy that the Chief of Staff published a non-classified version. So, but if we talk about the war between wars, before we say that, we have to start from a base that if you are talking about a war between wars, prepare yourself towards war. Sometimes you say it's either this or that. There's no reason, no capability to talk about war between wars or to do it in a situation of operational or military inferiority. And therefore, a sine qua non, in order to act with the logic of war between wars, is high readiness to war, readiness to exert force, and to show determination while determining a few borders, avoiding escalation, but operating. But the perception, I think, that Eisenkot, when he was chief of staff, he enriched it and conceptualized it. And this was significant during his years as chief of staff, is to introduce many actions that we did in a routine, with definite, defined, small campaigns, with achievements that are measurable, with the understanding and looking at how do you link between title of improving the strategic situation in Israel and the actions themselves, and to look at the affinity of various campaigns and their differences. And I think that in that there's some sort of a validity to this idea of war between the wars. And I think that the results or the achievements can be pinpointed individually, and we'll talk about it in a minute. Yoram, I have a question. We always deal with preparing for war and a war situation. Now we talk about the continuous war between wars. Maybe that's the main war. What about the risks at the moment and the risks in the future? How do you weigh one against the other? I don't know how you weigh one against the other, but Nitzan says if you are talking about the war between wars, then prepare yourself to war. I sat outside and suddenly I thought that the conference is at the breaks between the sessions, or the sessions between the breaks. So we're talking about what kind of uncertainty do you have to cope with. And it's different between the various war between wars that we wage. But if I look at it from the outside, there's all sorts of uncertainties that if, in fact, the war will break out, then we will have better conditions. But for that, you transfer some of the uncertainty to now. because it can become war any minute. So it's like a constant risk management. What I'm bothered by is the one who actually manages it. Don't they live in an illusion of accuracy? Because it's short and focused activities, the feeling that you can control it, I think it hasn't changed just as the war is uncertain, even the small wars are uncertain. And you have to risk, to do management of risk, and there's no definite possibilities. Amir, as one who was the Air Force commander, and we know that the Air Force is doing thousands of sorties and operations. Most of them apparently are successful, what is published in the media, but to what kind of a strategic reality does it lead us? What's the point at the end? If we talk about the point, and I want to focus on the period of Gadi Eisenkot as the Chief of Staff, there are 4 parameters of this point. One is to attack threats and foreign threats, potential threats. It's weapons and it is infrastructure. That's the first thing to hit. You don't wait on the border, but you proactive. You go and you act. The Middle East after the Arab Springs give us a lot of opportunities. The second thing, and it really is typical of the Eisenkot period, and that is the Iran basing itself in Syria. They were there before as well, and we had a war between the wars in the past as well. But now, if you talk about the point we're getting to and the components, the Iranian issue, I said, you can see them as a threat, obviously. But the goal or the objective, the military action, is a kind of an engine which is supposed to motivate a political effort, not necessarily Israeli, in order to take the Iranians out of Syria. So we are attacking their bases, but then we are motivating a political effort later. That's the second issue. The third one is to deter and postpone war. The great risks we have to manage, so that not to have war, but to postpone the war by the mere fact that you act and they see how many times you manage to penetrate. That evokes thoughts in their minds. And the last thing, if in fact war breaks out, either now or later, then the conditions for victory based on the achievements of the war between wars are going to be better than better conditions for victory. These are the 4 components of the objective, of the goal. And one word, where does it lead us to? Look at it from a macro-regional point of view. The State of Israel leads in its activity and its determination, and the Prime Minister talks about it a lot. All the other countries around here, vis-à-vis the deployment and the Iranian activity and all these proxies, the State of Israel is the leading force. And the strategic stability of the State of Israel following these activities, one can say delicately, has strengthened. Sounds good, but I'm still waiting for the next part, which has to come from the politicians. After the military success, we want some political successes. Yes, what he said in the second day, he said that there's an effort, after that political effort. Yeah, we'll go into it, but Nitzan, did we stop the Iranians in Syria? To a great extent, yes. And to a great extent, today there's a big gap
מול התוכניות
especially
שהאיראנים
vis-à-vis the
תכננו,
plans
המקום
that the
שהם רצו
Iranians
להיות,
had where they wanted
לבין
to be,
המצבם
and
בפועל.
their situation at the
וכמו
moment.
שאומרים,
And
לא
as
עלינו
people
המלאכה
say,
לגמור, אבל
we
לא
don't
אנו בני
have to
חורים
finish
להיבטל
the
ממנה.
job, but
כך
we
שבאמת
have to
העסק
be
הזה
part of
לא
it.
הסתיים.
So this has not
אבל
ended
לפני
yet.
שאנחנו אומרים את
But
זה,
before we
אני
say
חושב
that,
שאחד הדברים
I think that
המשמעותיים
one of the
שמתחבר
most
גם לאמירה שלך על
significant things
המימדים המדיניים, גם
that has
לדברים
to
שאמיר
do
אמר,
with the
קשור
politics
לזה
has to
שהמושג
do with the
להגיד
fact that
האיראנים
the
בסוריה
concept
הוא
to say
מושג בעייתי.
Iranians in Syria is a
דווקא
problematic
בסוגיה
concept.
האיראנית, בהבנה של
In the
האיום
understanding of
האיראני
the
על
Iranian
גבולותינו,
threat on
בקרבת
our
גבולותינו,
borders,
יש
close
איזה
to our
alignment
borders,
נדיר
there's
אפילו,
a rare alignment
במיקוד שלו בין
in its
ההסתכלות הצבאית
focus
להסתכלות
between
המדינית.
the military and the political point of view, because it has a lot of power.
אין לנו את זה בכל דבר.
We don't have it in other things. The Palestinian issue, we are far from that. But in the joint understanding between the government and the army regarding the essence of the potential threat from Iran and the fact that we have to cope with it, there is an identical point of view, but we have to be careful with that because we can go together without any constructive criticism, but still it has a lot of advantages. When we look at the Iranian side, there's great controversies and disputes. Iran is not one homogeneous bloc which wants to base itself in Syria. Within Iran there are great disputes, and some of this motivation of military actions that bring about political action is the identification of that crack within the Iranian perception regarding Syria, or the Iranian impact and the way they act, or the prices they have to pay for being in Syria and in the Middle East. There are Iranian footsteps in South America, Europe, wherever, and there are great disputes within the Iranian leadership. And part of the goal of our military actions is to widen this gap. Yeah, but who's going to take out the Iranians eventually from Syria? I think at the end it will be an Iranian decision. But we have a lot to do in order to contribute to them making that decision, to exert pressure, and the trigger can be a bomb that falls somewhere, all sorts of circles that have an impact, things that we do, psychological warfare, military diplomacy and others, and we want wider dimensions done by Israel, integrated with economic pressure and the price that the Iranians have to pay, military, economically, politically. Just this week, Germany made a decision to not have Iranian planes land in Germany. It has to do with Israeli intelligence and also of understandings that illustrate to the Iranians the price they have to pay and put them, they have to confront a dilemma. And we have definite achievements of a threat that was forming itself. Had we looked at it without any action today, we would have seen Iranian capabilities in intelligence, electronic warfare, air and land-to-land missiles and other things. Land military forces that don't exist today because of our actions, not only, but to a great extent because of that. Yoram, let me ask you something. And Itai also published an article that looked into the question on those conditions that Amir said that created the possibility for us to do quite a lot in this region. There's a feeling that these conditions are changing. Is that correct?
לא יודע.
I don't know.
איך נדע?
How can we know? How can we know?
איך נלמד?
How will we
תראה,
learn?
יש פה שתי נקודות שאני חושב
There
שצריך
are
להתייחס אליהן.
2 points
אחד,
here.
חזרה פה המילה כבר כמה פעמים.
רגע, יורם, אני בטוח שאתה לא מתכוון לזה שהתנאים לא משתנים. התנאים משתנים, אני יודע אם הם מקבילים או לא. זה שהם משתנים, אין דיון בכלל.
אמרתי, איך נדע?
I said, how will we know?
אז ברור שמרחב הפעולה משתנה, רואים את זה.
Obviously that the scope of action changes as
אני
well.
רוצה להזהיר ממשהו ולטעון איזה טענה. אחד הדברים שצריך להיזהר ממנו.
One thing you have to be cautious, it repeats itself. What we hear all the time, the need to an integration of political and military aspects First of all, we want a decision of the other side, and decision is made up of a lot of aspects.
הדבר הזה, אבל לפעמים כשאנחנו מסתכלים, כשאני מסתכל על העדפה הנגלית הישראלית, אתה רואה פעולות. ואז נהיה נורא חשוב לשמור על הדבר שאנחנו קוראים לו מרחב הפעולה או חופש הפעולה. במידה מסוימת אנחנו קנאים לו. אחד הדברים שצריך להיזהר, אני פה מזהיר, לא אף אחד מהיושבים פה, אלא דבר שאותי מטריד. אתה מסתכל על מקרה עבר, לפעמים, שמתחיל להיות מגבלות על חופש הפעולה, הצורך לשמור את חופש הפעולה,
on our freedom of action, that the need for freedom of action becomes stronger than the original goal. You have to be very careful, because the goal here wasn't to have a scope. The idea was to do something in order to perform a change.
למרות שאני, תשלחו לי קצת היסטוריה, רק מילה אחת.
אתה רוצה לחזור ל-1970?
לא 70, רגע, אתה יכול לחזור ל-70.
You can go back to the 70s, but I go less far. I remember the years that we used to do sorties in the skies of Syria, way back, yes. And we were all commanders at the time. With the Muppets. We used to penetrate Syria, not because we needed the intelligence, but we used to do it in order to show them that we can fly wherever we want, whenever we want. Without, I don't think it was enough. But let me say another thing about freedom of action. There are two different players here. One is Iran, and the other one is Russia. And these are two completely different players with restraints and interaction with us, and how much we can impact them, etc. But in these two cases, there's a kind of something that is forming. It's not that somebody is there who knows exactly what he wants and you have to cope with him. And that means that you can find yourselves in situations that both parties come to do things that were not their interests in the beginning, for better or worse. And that's another thing. Freedom of action. It's not that the other side says this and that and you have to do something else. Because with the Russians, it can go to very not good places. This is a war that may develop, God knows. There's a situation that the Russians can shut the skies of Syria for our activity. I don't think that life is between 0 and 1. There's no such thing, hermetic closure. But definitely they can have an impact tactically to narrow the freedom of action, not to prevent it, but we cannot be tempted by tactics, because the question is strategic. The fact that you know how to attack or to do this or the other, maybe you're poking a finger in their eye, but this is a strategic question, much more than that. What tools do you have in order to know in which situation you are? How can you weigh the various tools when you know that you're doing a tactic success but leading us to a strategic damage? Look, at the end of the day, it's a consideration of the need and the context and your modus vivendi. And if you do this or that, and what about the reactions? Can you control it or not? All this together is a composition that gives you some sort of a measurement if you went too far. But of course, it's not accurate science. Do you want to relate to this, or I'll ask you something else? Just a word. It's not a guarantee to an optimum result. But I think that at least from my involvement in the last few years, we tried to introduce those same questions, which is a thinking system. It's not just doing an action and then let's see what happens. I always say that first you have to think and then act. And I think that the effort to create this thinking process while learning from the friction and an effort to learn faster than the opponents. We talk about Russia. We deal a lot with an effort to understand, even to talk directly to them, to the military people, to the politicals, and we understand overtly what are their interests, and then we have a possibility to avoid strategic mistakes. Again, it's not an insurance company. Nothing is a zero-sum game, but there's a lot of awareness to the danger that you spoke about. and an effort to act in those areas while obtaining those same achievements. When we talk about learning, one of the things that we have to have, and I suppose it exists, you cannot, just as the other side doesn't have a plan, you cannot have it. Your flexibility, your capability to ask questions, to doubt what you're doing, that's very important. A long time. To bring a plan and to do it, that's a problem. Amir, why did we stop the policy of vagueness? I didn't come out of it. I don't want to ask Nitzan, but I think that we have to understand the characteristics of this campaign in the last few years in the context of the conflict, which is quite overt vis-à-vis the Iranians. If I take the years before that, 2013, various activities, there were Iranians there, but we saw it in a different way. So now we're talking about a struggle, a campaign on a daily basis, but it also tries to motivate that process we spoke about, and therefore its signature in this component of words and missiles. The component of words went a step higher because we want to motivate that process. And I'm not talking now about this statement or another, but I remind you, for years we didn't say a word. Not that all of a sudden something changed here. And then if we hit weaponry, we hit it, it was there and it's gone. But now we're trying to motivate something much bigger. Therefore, the words are now attached to the missiles. The extent, words, that's what I'm going to say. You know, I'll ask you, Yoram, it'll be easier for you to answer. You don't have problems of politically correct at the moment. There's a sense sometimes that the political echelon uses the army in order to create some sort of world of images, and it doesn't care what the results will happen, as long as it has the image. Is that, I think we live in an era that images are important. I cannot tell you about the war between words, but if we got used to think with classical theories, you think about the result, and then you think about how to get there, that some of the results that you want to obtain have to do with images, and you have to plan it in a completely different process. But I don't know if it's right here. It's difficult to answer. I think that you're raising something that doesn't exist in the measures, in the dimensions that you're talking about. I don't think that there are situations that the government actually directs the army to act in a certain way in order to resonate. I think most of the activities is a result of the analysis that comes from the military and is approved by the government. I don't remember any process significant which wanted to show off. But wholeheartedly, I can say that every activity that we did in the last few years had a practical goal with an achievement that was defined. And again, the operation is measured not just by a direct hit, but we definitely see the direct hit as a pivot on which we add other waves that represent wider scopes and economic pressure and others. But I don't accept the fact that there's some sort of a goal of show-off that serves only some political needs. I didn't see it, and I was in a position that I would have seen it. Amir, let me ask you, we spoke, I mean those people who are not in the system. When I'm still in the northern arena. We spoke about the bridge, this Iranian track of supply, the main axis, and in the last few years we started talking about the accurates. We have the bridge and the accurates. They get to Lebanon. Why don't we do anything in Lebanon? look at the alternatives. Nobody says that we don't act in Lebanon because, only definite, overt cyber attack is what we do. It's not a sporadic kind of actions. It's got cyber activities with a great signature and awareness issues and covert, and the combination is important. So we can talk about alternatives because we cannot just look at Lebanon. Lebanon is one of the major characteristics here, and what gave validity to this campaign was to take the Iranians out of Syria, to get them out of there. So you have to look at the alternatives, and according to that, to decide when you're doing, how you're doing, and how, and where and when. And if we look ahead, there are two alternatives to my mind. And one, you can call it a linear alternative, to continue what we're doing anyway, to continue, hopefully, that, as you said, it doesn't stop all the smuggling of weaponry and whatever. But these are very, very significant hits and a lot of achievements. However, it doesn't stop it completely, and that's why it delays them by years, but it doesn't stop them. The second thing is to get them out. I suggest we don't delude ourselves. The state of Israel, and it has a lot of force, and it does hit forcefully whoever needs to be hit and when. But our military capability is not what's going to get the Iranians out of Syria. What will get them out is a political effort, and I think it's one address. And it's true that people have to decide in Iran, but there's one address that can motivate this effort, and it's called Russia. Nobody else. Nobody else. And the other address has left already. We'll talk about that, but there's no military capability to get them out of there. So the military is the engine. And now the linear activity, there's a chance for escalation. And I think that such escalation in the current situation is not going to bring about a total war, because this Russian engine is not going to let it happen. This is a very big threat to the project that we're trying to do in Syria, but together with that, escalation. The escalation is Assad, of course, and we shouldn't delude ourselves. We're talking about processes here. What's going to be the scope of this meaning? Because the deterrence balance is asymmetric, and it will develop. If you launch a missile from the Hermon mountain, is part of it, and we saw it in all the other fronts. And it's going to be managed by both sides, and that's going to bring it to some sort of a deterrence balance that will hit partially the freedom of action, but really this linear alternative of continuing this situation apparently is not going to bring about the Russians to do what we would have wanted them to do, definitely not in the near future. But two things that can make the Russians do it is, first of all, the feasibility that they're going to lose vis-à-vis the Americans, either by pressure, all sorts of concessions to the Russians on a global court, maybe can cause them to leave. I don't believe it will. And the state of Israel has a card, a trump card. I wouldn't say trump card, but it can really hit hard this project of Assad and the fortification of Syria. And the Russians don't want it to happen. And I think that the Syrians understand it very well as well, that such an Iranian bombshell can really hit them. So it's very interesting, and I think that there's an alternative which is not linear, and it's not total either, and that is also a step ahead, that Israel is beginning to touch all sorts of things that it didn't do till today, but there's a great risk in that the Russians will be against us.
You asked Amir a concrete question regarding Lebanon, and I'd like to take on what Amir said and say something which is partial theoretical, but it's also applicable here and other places. I think we need to differentiate between your ability to control escalation, trying to monitor things and trying to be superior in the level that you're here, to control in the borders of the entire region. As far as the second thing, I'm a bit concerned. The first one, I quite agree with what Amir said earlier. Hopefully I understood what he was intending. It is very difficult to control the borders of a certain battlefield. It has to do with what Nitzan said earlier. So if you are fearing, if you want to control, make sure that it doesn't reach other places, you have to be strong in the other places where you don't want it to reach. And these are the means for you to control the situation. So the two efforts of controlling the escalation of a certain front and the other one will ultimately allow you to reach your goals. Nitzan, finally, when we look at Mabam as an ongoing battlefield, and there's not a lot of enthusiasm. We don't see a lot of enthusiasm for wars in this area. We have some events, but not really wars. Are we doing the right thing when we invest more towards specific capabilities rather than other capabilities? After all, we're talking about a trade-off. If my criticism or what we saw in the IDF regarding building the forces, it's not that we have invested a lot in Mabam, maybe not enough. Throughout the years, we were quite good with adjusting generic capabilities of intelligence to another designation. If you look at our application where we knew how to do the adjustments, even when there are less tanks and more terrorists, in various places. Maybe we should have put more resources in order to enlarge the toolbox that would allow for flexibility when conditions change, less kinetic force and more undercover forces. But I think that we also learned as we were moving along, all in all, the cost effectiveness of our intelligence is way better than building a force power for war. Ultimately, the cost not only of blood but also of money is relatively cheap when we talk about wars. And as long as we can get these goals while having proper monitoring and risk management, it is a cheaper and more efficient way to achieve the strategic betterment of the situation. Amir, would you like to say something regarding the Air Force or some sort of, let's say, a concluding statement from each and every one of you? A strategic dilemma here. Well, a word, because we definitely have this point of, are we taking the entire IDF towards a Mabam? We understand that we need to go directly there. The idea is the cooperation of capabilities, and if we can do everybody undercover, when it's difficult to tie Israel to a certain activity, it's excellent. The Air Force and its power stems out of its being very lethal and very flexible. And in Mabam, in the intelligence, it's very clear because cyber is important, commando is important, and many other things. The operating when Air Force is about minutes and hours, and the other operations, we talk about weeks and months. And so the wise thing to do is this integration. You need your flexibility, which is most lethal or creates risk because it's overt. But you have to have a rich toolbox that will know how to provide effective answer that will harm what needs to be harmed and will not escalate a war. ultimately, the cheapest way to obtain something is the best. I think that there is it's not new when I say that we have operations on an ongoing basis. It's not new. I think that the approach that we've heard here above this stage, which incorporates dimensions where the military aspect is necessary, and it is a catalyst, it is something that is mobilizing things. I think this is the right approach. One of the things that I'm fearing is that we live in a culture that sanctifies action, and then we focus on action rather than the outcome. And here we need to exercise caution. We worship the success of the military action. What follows later is something that we don't regard. Shimon Peres wrote an article in 1995, and he says that planning is not an action, but rather a thought. But ultimately, there is an action, and you need to think of the outcome. If we make sure to do it, it could be very good. Otherwise, well, I hope we don't get there. So, Nitzan, the Eisenkot Doctrine. Is this going to be the Kochavi doctrine? I don't know. But as a concluding statement, first of all, we need to see what the final result is. And I think that these speak for themselves to a large extent. The Iranian basing itself in Syria did not open a second front. We don't have an Iranian front with the intelligence capabilities and electronic capabilities. The Iranian and Hezbollah's plan in Lebanon, which included many precise missiles, ballistic and cruising missiles, and other very elaborate capabilities. This did not happen. It did not vanish the challenges in the Lebanon front, but at least we didn't see this step up. And so I see that we have a definitive proof of the idea and perception. This was right for the past. The future is different. It's ever-changing. And I think that the muscles that we have strengthened, and here I'm certain that the incoming Chief of Staff will do his work properly, took a continued process of thought, adjustments toward change, developing new capabilities, and we strengthened quite many muscles. We are in a different place in the capabilities of exercising our influence on one's understanding, cyber capabilities, and many other things that we have strengthened. This allows us for a variety of tools that also allow us not to worship to this classic military action that sometimes cannot be appropriate, sometimes can take us to unwanted territories. Well, in conclusion, in the preliminary talks, one of you said, they didn't use the sentence in particular, but I will be using it. This is not my idea, I'm adopting it. The sentence was, the more successful we are in our achievements, in our military achievements, the strategic goals grow further and further away. Any reaction there? I think that it is a very clear human characteristic which is not necessarily relevant to Israel only. Decision makers who face decisions that will decide on their people's future. This exceeds the borders of Israel. They will have the decision at the last moment possible, and we hope the decision will be a good one. I think that an army which manages to supply security, and this is a situation we wish to happen, it's very, very clear. When you give security, then there's no pressure. And then the strain that we have described, the strain that has a military action, and then something political, no matter what, it is stuck because of electricity issues at the airport. Well, it doesn't necessarily go at the same pace, because when it's convenient, you don't need to have rash decisions. And so the army's role is to supply security. And full stop. And if you need a political achievement, the army needs to provide the best conditions to do that. What does he do with that? This is up to the decision maker. Thank you very much. It was very interesting. It was fascinating. Really. Thank you.